They say you find yourself in the quiet places, the forgotten corners of the map where the cell's signal dies and the nearest neighbor is a mile of rustling corn away. I wasn't looking to find myself. Not really. I was mostly looking to get lost. Running, maybe, though I wouldn't have admitted it then. Running from a life that felt too loud, too demanding, too full of expectations I couldn't meet. So, when the ad popped up, Librarian Caretaker needed, Asphodel Point Library, accommodation provided, it felt less like a job opportunity and more like an escape hatch. Asphodel Point wasn't even a town, more like a geographical suggestion. A cluster of maybe 20 houses, a boarded up general store, a church that looked like it hadn't seen a Sunday service since Eisenhower, and the library. The library itself was an anomaly, a stern, Gothic looking building of dark stone and ivy that seemed far too grand for its dwindling surroundings. It stood on a slight rise overlooking the skeletal remains of the town, flanked by ancient, brooding oak trees. The drive out was long, pushing deeper into rural territory where the roads narrowed and the trees crowded closer. By the time I pulled my sputtering 20-year-old Civic up the library's gravel drive, dusk was bleeding purple and orange across the sky, and the place looked even more imposing. Lights glowed warmly from a few windows, a lone beacon in the encroaching gloom. Miss Eleanor Vance met me at the heavy oak front door. She was exactly what you'd picture when thinking of an old-world librarian. Tall, thin to the point of being brittle, with sharp grey eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin over her cheekbones. She looked me up and down, her expression somewhere between skeptical and relieved. "Alexander Davies?" she asked, her voice dry as old parchment. "Alex, please," I said, offering a hand she ignored. "You're younger than I expected," she observed, stepping aside to let me in. "But no matter. The work isn't strenuous. Mostly. The inside of the library was overwhelming. The scent hit me first, that unique, almost sacred smell of old paper, leather bindings, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic and cold. Towering shelves packed tight with books stretched up into the shadowy vaulted ceiling, creating canyons of literature. Reading tables with green shaded lamps dotted the main floor, islands of light in a sea of shadow. It was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of old wiring and the whisper of my own breath. "It's quite something," I managed, feeling dwarfed by the sheer volume of print. "It is the Blackwood Bequest," Miss Vance said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Josiah Blackwood built it in 1888, left the building and his entire collection to the county, provided it always remained a public library. An eccentric man, interested in esoteric subjects." She led me towards a large, imposing circulation desk near the back. The previous caretaker left rather abruptly. "Health reasons, supposedly, which leaves us in need." She stopped and turned to face me, her grey eyes sharp. "The job is simple, Mr. Davies. Keep the library clean, manage the circulation, what little there's these days, and maintain the building. You live upstairs. The apartment is modest but comfortable. Board is included, salary is paid monthly. The hours are Tuesday to Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Are you prepared for the solitude?" "I think so," I said. It was the solitude I craved. "Good." She retrieved a small, bound notebook and a pen from the desk. "There are, however, certain protocols, specific duties related to the library's unique nature and Mr. Blackwood's collection. They are non-negotiable." She opened the notebook, her long, bony finger tracing lines of elegant, spidery script. "Firstly, the West Archive. It is located through that door." She pointed to a heavy, iron-banded door at the far end of the main hall, partially obscured by a towering shelf. "It contains Mr. Blackwood's private collection. Older, rarer texts, some quite fragile, some sensitive." Her gaze met mine, unwavering. "Rule number 1. The West Archive is to remain locked at all times unless specific retrieval is required. The silver key on this ring, she lifted a heavy ring holding two keys. One silver, one brass, is for the archive. The brass key is for the front door. Never confuse them. Okay, I nodded. Seems simple enough. Rule number 2. No one, under any circumstances, enters the West Archive after sunset or before sunrise. All work within must be completed during daylight hours. Got it. Rule number 3. When inside the archive, you may hear sounds. Whispering, scratching, perhaps movement in the stacks. You are to ignore them. It is merely the building settling or the wind. Do not investigate. A slight chill traced its way down my spine. Right. Ignore noises. Rule number 4. Certain books in the archive are bound in black leather with no title on the spine. Do not touch these books. Do not attempt to read them. If one is found out of place, inform me immediately. Do not reshelve it yourself. Black books, no touching. Check. This was getting weirder. Rule number 5. If you find a book reshelved incorrectly or open on a table when you know you left it closed, leave it. Do not correct it. Do not close it. Alert me. We allow the library. Its preferences. The library has preferences? I couldn't help but ask. Miss Vance gave a thin, humorless smile. Mr. Blackwood was a man of particular tastes, Mr. Davies. He imbued this place with a certain character. Rule number 6. The basement is off limits. The door is kept bolted. There is nothing down there of concern, merely old storage and faulty wiring. For your safety, do not attempt entry. 7. She continued, her voice dropping slightly. At precisely 9 p.m. each night, before you retire upstairs, you will lock the front door with the brass key and then place 1 pinch of salt. There is a container kept on the desk, on the threshold inside the library. Every night, without fail. Salt? Why? Tradition, she said curtly. Mr. Blackwood insisted upon it. It keeps pests away. 8. You are the sole caretaker. Do not allow visitors after closing hours. Do not invite guests to stay overnight. You are responsible for this building and its contents. 9. If you feel watched, particularly in the older sections or near the archive, do not react. Acknowledge the feeling and continue with your duties. Showing fear encourages things. Encourages things? What things? But her face was impassive. And finally, 10. Should you find yourself unable to continue your duties for any reason, you must inform me. You do not simply leave. Arrangements must be made. She closed the notebook. Do you understand and accept these rules, Mr. Davies? I hesitated. This was bizarre. Whispers, moving books, salt rituals, feeling watched. It sounded like the ramblings of a senile old woman or the setup for a bad horror movie. But I needed the job. I needed the escape. And besides, it was probably just old building noises and local superstition exaggerated over time. Yes, Miss Vance. I understand and accept. Very good. She handed me the key ring. Your apartment is the door at the top of the stairs behind the circulation desk. Take tonight to settle in. Your duties begin tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I will be here until noon to guide you through the opening procedures. After that, you are on your own until I return next Monday morning. You're leaving? I have arrangements in the city, she said vaguely. Don't worry, Mr. Davies. You have the rules. Follow them precisely, and you will be perfectly fine. Her emphasis on precisely was unnerving. She showed me the small container of coarse salt kept in a desk drawer, the location of the main light switches, and the stairway leading up to the apartment. Then, with a curt nod, she gathered her coat and handbag. Remember the salt tonight, Mr. Davies. 9 p.m. sharp. And she was gone, leaving me alone in the vast, silent library as the last light faded outside. The apartment was basic but clean, a small living area, a kitchenette, a bedroom, a bathroom. Old furniture, mismatched plates, but functional. I spent an hour bringing in my meager belongings from the car. The silence of the library below pressing in on me. I tried playing music on my phone, but the signal was non-existent. Rule 9 mentioned unreliable electronics. Great. As 9 p.m. approached, I felt a ridiculous sense of anxiety about the salt. It was stupid, just a superstition. But Miss Vance had been so insistent. Descending the stairs back into the darkened library, the only illumination came from the single green shaded lamp I'd left on at the circulation desk. Shadows stretched long and deep between the shelves. The air felt colder. I walked to the front door, the brass key feeling heavy in my hand. Locked. Easy enough. Then, the salt. I opened the desk drawer, found the container, and took a pinch. It felt coarse and cool against my fingertips. I sprinkled it carefully along the inside threshold, feeling like an idiot. What pests was this supposed to deter? Mice? As I straightened up, I heard it. A faint sound, seeming to come from the far end of the hall, near the west archive door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My blood ran cold. Rule number 3. Ignore them. It is merely the building settling or the wind. Do not investigate. It was just the building settling. Old pipes. Wind whistling through a crack somewhere. Scratch, scratch, scrape. It sounded deliberate, like fingernails on old wood, coming from behind the archive door. I backed away slowly towards the stairs, my heart pounding. Tradition, pests, encourages things. The rules suddenly felt less like quaint eccentricities and more like vital warnings. I retreated upstairs, locking my apartment door behind me, the scratching sound echoing in the cavernous silence below. Settling, I told myself. Just the building settling. But as I lay in bed, staring into the unfamiliar darkness, another sound joined the scratching, a faint, almost inaudible whispering, seeming to rise from the very heart of the ancient library itself. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and restless, punctured by the phantom sounds of scratching and whispers that seemed to bleed into my dreams. I woke with a jolt just before dawn, the unfamiliar silence of the apartment pressing in. The first thought that hit me was the library below. Had the scratching stopped? Was the salt still there? Throwing on clothes, I crept down the stairs, the first grey light filtering weakly through the tall, arched windows of the main hall. The library looked different in the daylight, still imposing, but less overtly menacing. The shadows had retreated, revealing intricate woodwork on the shelves and faded patterns in the carpets I hadn't noticed before. My first stop was the front door. The pinch of salt I'd placed on the threshold the night before was undisturbed. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by embarrassment. Of course, it was undisturbed. What did I expect? Little spectral footprints? Shaking my head at my own paranoia, I checked the heavy oak door, still securely locked. Next, drawn by an almost morbid curiosity, I walked the length of the hall towards the west archive. The iron-banded door stood sentinel, silent and imposing. I ran my hand over the cool metal bands, examining the heavy silver lock. No scratches, no sign of forced entry. I listened intently, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. Not even the settling sounds I'd convinced myself were the source of the scratching last night. It must have just been the old building, my tired mind playing tricks. My official duties began at 10 a.m. Opening the library involved unlocking the front door, brass key, check, turning on the main lights, and setting out the open assign, a task that felt performative given the library's isolation. Asphodel Point didn't exactly seem like a bustling hub of literary enthusiasts. The morning passed in a slow, quiet rhythm. I familiarized myself with the circulation desk, the ancient card catalog system, yes, actual cards, and the rudimentary computer database that seemed to have been installed sometime in the late 90s and barely updated since. I dusted shelves, straightened books, and tried to ignore the persistent feeling of being watched. Rule 9. It was strongest near the back. By the archive door, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like unseen eyes following my movements. I forced myself to focus on sorting returned books, my hands slightly trembling. Around noon, the bell above the front door jingled, startling me. An elderly man, leaning heavily on a cane, shuffled in. He introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy, one of the few remaining residents of Asphodel Point and, apparently, the library's most regular patron. He came, he explained, mostly for the quiet and the old newspapers. He didn't check anything out, just sat for an hour at one of the reading tables, methodically turning the brittle pages of a decades-old local paper before nodding a silent goodbye and shuffling back out. His presence was a brief, welcome break from the oppressive solitude. After he left, the silence descended again, heavier than before. I decided to explore the main stacks more thoroughly, trying to get a sense of the collection beyond the general fiction near the entrance. The classification system was idiosyncratic, clearly of Josiah Blackwood's own devising. Sections were labeled with vague titles like Celestial Harmonies, Subterranean Queries, and Forgotten Histories. Within these, the books ranged from standard academic texts to leather-bound volumes with titles in languages I couldn't identify, their pages filled with strange diagrams and unsettling illustrations. In the Forgotten Histories section, tucked away in a dimly lit alcove, I found a row dedicated to local lore, mostly handwritten journals and typed manuscripts bound crudely with string. One title caught my eye, A History of Asphodel Point and the Blackwood Bequest. I pulled it down carefully. The pages were brittle, the ink faded. It spoke of the town's founding, its brief period of prosperity when a nearby mine was active, and its slow decline. Then it came to Josiah Blackwood. An enigmatic figure, the author wrote, Blackwood amassed a fortune through unspecified means and retreated to Asphodel Point in the 1880s. He was a recluse, rarely seen, devoted entirely to the acquisition of rare and unusual texts. His library, built with surprising speed, became his fortress. Locals whispered of strange lights seen in the windows at night, of unsettling chants echoing from the building, of deliveries arriving under the cover of darkness. Blackwood himself was said to dabble in practices best left undisturbed, his collection rumored to contain more than just forgotten history. The manuscript then detailed Blackwood's death, found slumped over a book in the West Archive, no apparent cause, and the subsequent enactment of his will, leaving the library to the county under its strange provisos. The author noted a peculiar detail. Several potential librarians hired in the early years left abruptly, citing unease or disturbances within the building, particularly concerning the West Archive. A cold draft snaked around my ankles, making me jump. I looked around. No open windows, no vents nearby, just the chill air pooling in the alcove. I closed the manuscript, a new layer of unease settling over me. Esoteric subjects, practices best left undisturbed, disturbances. I reshelved the book and decided cleaning the front windows offered a less unnerving task. As I worked, polishing the glass, my eyes kept drifting back towards the West Archive door. It seemed darker than the surrounding wall, almost absorbing the light. The feeling of being watched intensified. I finished the windows quickly and retreated to the relative safety of the circulation desk. The afternoon wore on. No other visitors appeared. The silence was broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock I hadn't noticed before, standing in a shadowy corner near the main staircase, and the occasional creak or groan from the building's ancient bones. I tried reading, but couldn't focus, my mind replaying Miss Vance's rules and the passage from the local history. At 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before closing, I began the shutdown procedure, turning off lights section by section, ensuring all reading lamps were off, checking the few windows on the ground floor. The library grew progressively darker, shadows pooling and deepening. By the time only the circulation desk lamp remained lit, the atmosphere felt charged, expectant. 6 p.m. Time to lock up. I walked to the front door, the heavy brass key in hand. As I inserted it into the lock, I heard it again. Fainter this time, muffled by distance and thick wood, but unmistakable. Scratch, scratch. From the direction of the West Archive. I froze, he half-turned. Ignore it. Building settling. Wind. I finished locking the door, the thunk of the bolt echoing in the silence. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The scratching continued, soft, rhythmic, persistent. Retreating to the desk, I retrieved the salt container, my hand shaking slightly. Placing the salt on the threshold felt even more significant tonight, less like a foolish tradition and more like a necessary word. As I stood, dusting the salt from my fingers, the grandfather clock began to chime. Not the hour, but a strange, discordant melody I didn't recognize, the notes hanging heavy in the stagnant air. It chimed 9 times, then fell silent. It wasn't 9 p.m. It wasn't even 6:30. Panic tightened its icy grip. I backed away, my eyes darting between the clock, the front door, and the shadowed archway leading towards the West Archive. The scratching had stopped. The library was utterly, unnervingly silent, save for the frantic pounding of my own heart. I turned and fled up the stairs to my apartment, locking the door and shoving a chair under the knob, the discordant chime of the clock echoing in my ears. The chair wedged under the doorknob felt laughably inadequate. I spent most of the night sitting on the floor, back against the wall nearest the door, listening. The library below remained stubbornly silent. No more scratching, no discordant chimes, just the low hum of electricity and the occasional creak of aged wood. The silence itself became a source of anxiety. Was the absence of sound normal, or was it waiting? I must have drifted off sometime before dawn, slumped against the wall, because I woke stiff and cold to the first tentative rays of sunlight painting stripes across the dusty floor. The silence held. Cautiously, I removed the chair and opened the door a crack, peering down the stairwell. The main hall looked exactly as I'd left it. Empty, still, bathed in the growing morning light. Downstairs, a routine check revealed nothing overtly amiss. The salt on the threshold remained untouched. The archive door was closed and silent. The grandfather clock stood stoically in its corner, hands indicating the correct time, pendulum swinging in a steady rhythm, as if its midnight performance had never happened. Doubt began to creep in. Was I overtired? Letting the isolation and the strange rules get to me? Maybe Miss Vance's protocols were just elaborate psychological tests for potential caretakers designed to weed out the imaginative or easily spooked. Salt container in hand, I headed back to the threshold. Just as I bent down, a single, clear sound echoed from the direction of the West Archive. Thump, like a heavy book falling flat onto a wooden floor. I froze, salt spilling from my trembling fingers onto the carpet. Rule number 3. Ignore them. It was just a book falling. Old bindings fail. Gravity happens. Thump. Another one. Closer this time? Impossible to tell in the echoing acoustics of the library. My breath hitched. I forced myself to finish sprinkling the salt, the ritual feeling both absurd and vitally important. Straightening up, I scanned the darkening hall. Nothing moved. The archive door remained closed. Then, the whispering started. Not the vague, directionless susurrus from the night before, but clearer, closer. It seemed to emanate from the shelves themselves, from the very air around me. Sibilant, overlapping voices, impossible to decipher, yet filled with a chilling, insinuating quality. Rule number 3. Ignore them. Clenching my fists, I turned towards the stairs, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The whispering seemed to follow, swirling around me, plucking at the edges of my hearing. I reached the bottom step, my hand gripping the banister. Suddenly, the main lights flickered violently, plunging the hall into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life, dimmer than before. In that split second of darkness, I thought I saw movement near the archive door, a tall, slender shadow detaching itself from the deeper gloom, impossibly thin, momentarily silhouetted against the archway before the lights returned. I didn't wait to see if it was still there. I bolted up the stairs, not stopping until I was inside my apartment. Door slammed, locked, chair wedged firmly under the knob. I collapsed against the door, gasping for breath, the sound of the whispering still echoing in my ears. The image of the fleeting shadow burned into my retinas. The rules were no longer just suggestions. They felt like the only thin line holding back something truly terrible. And I had just found one of its forbidden books sitting out in the open. Saturday was a blur of forced normalcy. I woke, stiff and unrested, from a few hours of shallow sleep snatched in the armchair. The hallway outside my apartment, door unnervingly silent. Descending the stairs felt like entering a lion's den, but the library greeted me with the same dusty, sunlit stillness as the day before. The grandfather clock ticked rhythmically. The salt lay undisturbed. The west archive door remained shut. My first act, driven by gnawing anxiety, was to check the alcove in the subterranean queries section. My breath caught. The black leather-bound book was still there, exactly as I'd left it, wedged between its mundane neighbors. Seeing it confirmed it hadn't been a hallucination, a trick of the dim light, or my overactive imagination. It was real, and it was waiting. Reporting it to Miss Vance felt impossibly far away. To more days and nights alone in this place, with that thing sitting on an open shelf. The thought was almost paralyzing. I spent the morning performing my duties with robotic precision, constantly aware of the book's presence, the library's watchful silence. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of paper felt amplified, significant. Mr. Abernathy arrived like clockwork around noon, his slow shuffle and mundane request for old newspapers a bizarre counterpoint to the tension coiling inside me. He seemed oblivious to the library's charged atmosphere, settling into his usual chair and losing himself in headlines from 1973. His normalcy was almost jarring. For a fleeting moment, I considered confiding in him, asking if he'd ever noticed anything strange, but the thought died as soon as it formed. What could this frail old man do? And besides, Rule 8, you are the sole caretaker. Do not allow visitors after closing hours. While not explicitly forbidding conversation, the implication of isolation was clear. Best to keep my fears to myself. After Mr. Abernathy left, the silence returned, thick and watchful. I found myself unable to stay still, pacing the aisles, pretending to organize books, but really just needing to move, to feel less like a target pinned by an unseen gaze. My path inevitably led me back towards the alcove. From a distance, I watched the black book. Did it look slightly different? Was it pushed further back on the shelf? Or was that just my paranoia painting details that weren't there? Then I noticed something else. On the floor, directly below the shelf holding the black book, lay a single, small, dried oak leaf. Odd. I hadn't noticed it before, and I was certain I'd swept this area yesterday. The windows were all closed, and there were no oak trees immediately outside this part of the building. Where could it have come from? Recalling Rule 5, if you find a book reshelved incorrectly, leave it. I wondered if a leaf counted. Probably not. Still, the sight of it, so out of place, so near that book, felt like another small, unsettling detail in a growing pattern. I left the leaf where it lay. The rest of the afternoon was agonizingly slow. I tried to lose myself in the library's bizarre collection, pulling down books at random. One, from a section titled Nocturnal Cartography, contained hand-drawn maps of impossible, labyrinthine spaces beneath cities that didn't exist. Another, bound in what looked disturbingly like snakeskin, detailed complex rituals involving moonlight and shadows. The sheer strangeness of Blackwood's collection was overwhelming, hinting at a mind obsessed with the hidden, the forbidden, the esoteric. As evening approached, my anxiety ratcheted up. The memory of the flickering lights, the fleeting shadow, the insistent whispering, it was all fresh, vivid. I performed the closing tasks mechanically, my senses on high alert. Locking the front door, I half expected the scratching to start immediately, but silence reigned. Back at the desk, salt container in hand, I paused. The grandfather clock chimed the half hour, 6:30 p.m. Correctly this time. Small comfort. I walked to the threshold, the silence pressing down. Just as I bent to sprinkle the salt, I heard a faint metallic clink from upstairs. My apartment? My head snapped up. I listened, straining my ears. Nothing. Maybe just the pipes? Old buildings make noises. Rule 3. Ignore them. But it had sounded distinct, deliberate, like something small being dropped on a hard floor. I finished placing the salt, my movements jerky. Was someone or something upstairs? In my apartment? The thought was terrifying. The apartment was supposed to be my sanctuary, the one place immune to the library's strangeness. But Rule 8, you are the sole caretaker. And Rule 6, the basement is off limits. Where else could something hide? The whispering started again as I backed away from the door. Soft, insidious, seeming to curl out from between the books. This time, I thought I could almost make out words, fragments, nonsense syllables mixed with what sounded chillingly like my name. Alex, SSSSHAH. Davies, comes. I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head. No, I whispered. Just the wind. Settling. But there was no wind. The air was deathly still. I forced myself to turn towards the stairs, towards the source of the clink, towards my possibly compromised apartment. Every step felt heavy, reluctant. The whispering seemed to fade slightly as I ascended, replaced by the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. At the top of the stairs, I paused outside my apartment door. Listening. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. The small living area was dark, lit only by the faint twilight filtering through the window. Nothing seemed out of place. Kitchenette clear. Bathroom door closed. Bedroom door ajar. Heart pounding. I stepped inside, closing and locking the door behind me. I flicked on the main light. Everything looked normal. I checked the kitchenette. Knives still in the block. Drawers closed. I opened the bathroom door, empty. Shower curtain still. Then, the bedroom. I pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. Bed neatly made, or as neat as I ever made it. Closet door shut. Nothing seemed disturbed. I let out a shaky breath. It must have been the pipes. Just my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Turning to leave the bedroom, my foot kicked something on the floor. Something small and metallic that skittered across the wooden boards. I froze, then slowly bent down, reaching for it. My fingers closed around a cold, smooth object. I lifted it into the light. It was the silver key. The key to the West Archive. It hadn't been me. I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't even brought the keys upstairs. They were supposed to be hanging on a hook behind the circulation desk downstairs. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. It wasn't the pipes. Something had been in my apartment, and it had left the key. Why? Was it an invitation? A warning? A trap? And how had it gotten in? The door had been locked. My eyes darted to the bedroom window. It faced the back, overlooking a patch of overgrown woods behind the library. The latch was still fastened, but beneath it, on the dusty windowsill, lay another single, dried oak leaf. Part 5. My fingers clenched around the cold, silver key. It felt alien in my palm, heavy with unspoken implications. This wasn't possible. The apartment door had been locked, bolted even, with a chair jammed under the knob for good measure. No broken windows, no sign of forced entry. Yet, here was the key to the forbidden West Archive, lying brazenly on my bedroom floor, accompanied by another impossible oak leaf on the windowsill. How? The question hammered against my skull. Had the shadow I'd glimpsed slipped through the keyhole like smoke? Had it materialized within the room itself? The feeling of violation was profound. This small apartment was meant to be the neutral zone, the off-duty barracks where the library's strangeness couldn't reach. Clearly, I was wrong. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any other sign of intrusion. Dust motes danced in the twilight beams, but nothing else seemed out of place. The air, however, felt thick, heavy, carrying the same faint metallic tang I sometimes smelled near the archive door. I pocketed the silver key, its weight a constant, unnerving reminder. The brass key for the front door was still downstairs on its hook where it belonged. I hadn't brought either key up. This was deliberate, placed here for me to find. Was this an invitation, as I'd wondered? A lure? Or was it a test? A test of my adherence to the rules. Rule 1. The West Archive is to remain locked at all times unless specific retrieval is required. Finding the key didn't automatically constitute a requirement for retrieval. But Rule 4. Certain books, bound in black leather. If one is found out of place, inform me immediately. That book was out of place. Miss Vance was gone. Was retrieving the archive key, left mysteriously in my room, now part of fulfilling my duty to deal with the out-of-place black book? The rules felt like a logic puzzle designed by a madman. And the oak leaves? First downstairs below the black book, now here on my windowsill. What did they signify? A calling card? A territorial marking? My stomach churned. I couldn't stay in the apartment. It no longer felt safe. But venturing back down into the library, especially as night deepened, felt equally perilous. I was trapped between a compromised sanctuary and a watchful, waiting unknown. Armed with nothing but a trembling resolve and a heavy silver key, I descended the stairs. The main hall was swallowed by shadows, the single desk lamp casting a weak circle of light. The grandfather clock ticked, each second echoing like a drumbeat. The whispering had ceased, but the silence felt brittle, poised to shatter. My first check was the alcove. The black book remained on the shelf, untouched, undisturbed. Below it, the single oak leaf lay on the floor. I shone my phone's flashlight around the base of the shelves, the floor, the surrounding area. Nothing else seemed amiss. Then, my light caught something on the floor about 10 feet away from the alcove, near the entrance to the main stacks. Another dried oak leaf. My breath hitched. I swept the light further. Another leaf near the reading tables. And another closer to the circulation desk. A trail. A scattered, almost deliberate path of oak leaves leading from the general direction of the subterranean queries section towards the front door? No, towards the grandfather clock. My hand tightened on the silver key in my pocket. This wasn't random. Leaves don't just appear indoors, scattered in a path. Rule 9, if you feel watched, do not react. But this was more than a feeling. This was evidence. Physical manipulation. I followed the sparse trail, my flashlight beam dancing nervously. The final leaf lay directly at the base of the grandfather clock. The clock itself stood silent now, pendulum still. Had it stopped? I hadn't noticed its ticking cease. As I stared at it, the clock face, dimly lit by my phone, seemed to waver. The Roman numerals blurred for a second, the hands jumped erratically, then settled. It now read precisely 3 a.m. Impossible. It was barely 7 p.m. A low groan echoed through the library, seeming to come from the clock itself, or perhaps from deep within the walls behind it. A sound of immense weight shifting, of ancient mechanisms grinding. Thump. The sound from last night. A book falling. But this time it came not from the archive, but from upstairs. From my apartment. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness towards the staircase. Had it followed me back up? Or was there another? The clink I'd heard earlier. Had that been the key being placed, and this thump? Or something else entirely? Stay or investigate? Rule 3 warred with a primal urge to know what was in my supposed safe space. But the path of leaves, the malfunctioning clock, the key. It all felt like a deliberate breadcrumb trail, a manipulation. Going back upstairs felt like walking into a prepared trap. My gaze was drawn inexorably back to the West Archive door. Silent. Waiting. I had the key. The black book was out. Something was clearly wrong, escalating. Miss Vance wasn't here. Maybe, maybe securing the black book was the specific retrieval required mentioned in Rule 1. Maybe the key was provided because it needed to be dealt with before Monday. It was a rationalization, born of fear and a desperate need to do something, but it felt plausible. More plausible than waiting passively for whatever was making noises upstairs. Decision made, heart hammering against my ribs, I walked the length of the hall. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger as I approached the iron-banded door. The feeling of being watched intensified to an almost unbearable degree. Standing before the door, silver key held tight, I hesitated. Was I about to break a fundamental rule or fulfill a hidden clause? The contradictory nature of the rules felt designed to confuse, to push one towards transgression. Taking another shaky breath, I inserted the silver key into the heavy lock. It turned with surprising smoothness, a well-oiled click echoing in the profound silence. I grasped the cold iron handle, pulled, and the heavy door swung inward, releasing a gust of cold, dry air that smelled of dust, ancient paper, and something else. Something like dried flowers and ozone. Beyond the threshold lay darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness, untouched by the weak light spilling from the main hall. My phone's flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed by it, penetrating only a few feet before dissipating into nothing. Rule 2. No one enters the West Archive after sunset. It was well after sunset. I stood on the precipice, key in hand, door open, having already broken one rule by simply unlocking it at this hour. Stepping inside felt like leaping off a cliff. But the thought of the black book loose in the library, the noises upstairs, the manipulative trail of leaves. Staying out felt just as dangerous. Holding my breath, flashlight held high, I took one step across the threshold into the oppressive darkness of the West Archive. The heavy door clicked softly shut behind me. The moment the heavy door sealed me inside the West Archive, the silence became absolute, smothering. The faint hum of electricity from the main hall vanished, replaced by a profound stillness that pressed against my eardrums. The cold intensified, biting through my thin jacket, carrying that strange mix of old paper, dust, ozone, and dried flowers, an unnervingly funereal scent. My phone's flashlight beam, which had seemed adequate in the main library, felt pathetic here, cutting only a short, trembling tunnel through a darkness so thick it felt tangible, viscous. Rule 2 screamed in my mind, no entry after sunset. I had not only entered, but the door had closed behind me. Whether it locked automatically, I didn't dare check. Turning back felt as dangerous as pressing forward. Taking hesitant steps, I swept the flashlight beam around. The layout was different from the main library. The towering shelves were closer together, creating narrow, claustrophobic aisles that twisted away into unseen depths. The shelves themselves were made of dark, almost black wood, crammed with books bound mostly in aged leather and dark cloth. Unlike the main library's eccentric classifications, these sections seemed unmarked, chaotic. Strange, unsettling diagrams and illustrations flashed in the periphery as my light beam moved. Interspersed with the books were odd objects on the shelves, clouded glass jars containing unidentifiable shapes, small boxes carved with unsettling symbols, even what looked chillingly like a shrunken head, leathery and wrinkled, perched atop a stack of crumbling manuscripts. Josiah Blackwood's esoteric subjects were clearly on full display. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming here, a constant, multi-directional pressure, as if unseen eyes peered from every shadowed gap between the volumes. I forced myself to focus, to breathe. My objective: find where the black, untitled books belonged. Confirming the one outside was truly out of place felt crucial, a necessary step before deciding what to do next. I moved deeper into the labyrinthine stacks, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the unseen floor beneath scattered dust and debris. The air grew colder still. The whispers started again, much clearer now, seeming to slither out from the shelves flanking me. They weren't just random sounds, they felt directed at me. Soft, sibilant voices overlapping, calling my name, murmuring phrases that almost made sense before dissolving into unintelligible static. Alex. Find. Door. Davies. Open. Book. Listen. SSSHAH. Rule 3. Ignore them. Easier said than done when they sounded like they were inches from my ear. I gritted my teeth, keeping the flashlight beam moving, trying not to react. After several minutes of navigating the disorienting aisles, I found it. A distinct section, marked only by a subtle shift in the oppressive atmosphere, a pocket of even deeper cold. Here, several shelves were dedicated entirely to identical volumes, bound in that same smooth, featureless black leather, spines utterly blank. Most shelves were full, but on one, near shoulder height, there was a single, book-sized cap. The dust pattern around it was slightly disturbed. This had to be where the stray book belonged. Seeing the empty space solidified my unease. The book was out of place. Significantly so. It hadn't just fallen, it had been moved, taken out of this forbidden archive and placed deliberately in the main library. Why? As I stood there, staring at the empty slot, my flashlight beam flickered erratically. Once, twice, then it stabilized, but seemed dimmer. My heart hammered. Old batteries? Or something else? The idea of being plunged into absolute darkness in this place was unthinkable. Get a grip, Davies, I muttered, tapping the flashlight casing. Just then, another sound broke the silence. Not a whisper, not a thump. A soft, distinct click, like a latch disengaging. It came from deeper within the archive, further down the aisle I was in. I froze, flashlight beam aimed into the consuming darkness ahead. Rule 3. Do not investigate. But the sound was so clear, so mechanical. Not a building settling noise. Holding my breath, I listened. Silence. Had I imagined it? Then, a faint rustling, like old paper being disturbed, followed by another soft click. Someone, or something, was in here with me, moving through the stacks. Opening things? My mind raced. Stay put? Retreat back to the door, if it would even open? Or cautiously investigate the sound? Every option felt fraught with peril. The black book was still outside. Maybe retrieving it and returning it to its shelf was the quickest way to restore whatever order had been disturbed, to appease whatever presence resided here. That meant breaking Rule 4, do not touch these books. But leaving it out felt like leaving a loaded gun unattended. And investigating the clicking sound felt like suicidal curiosity. As I wrestled with the decision, my flashlight beam caught something on the floor near my feet, tucked almost under the bottom shelf. Another dried oak leaf. Cold dread washed over me. It was a trail, not just outside, but in here too, leading deeper into the archive, towards the source of the clicking. This wasn't random. It was a deliberate, staged series of events. The key, the book outside, the leaves, the clock, the noises upstairs, the clicking now. It was all designed to lead me here, to make me enter, to make me follow. My hand instinctively went to the silver key in my pocket. Was following the path the only way through this? Was ignoring it the greater danger? The library, Miss Vance had said, had its preferences. Was this its way of demanding something? The clicking sound came again, slightly louder, accompanied by a faint, scraping noise. Resignation settled heavily in my gut. Ignoring this felt impossible now. Whatever game this library, or whatever resided within it, was playing, I seemed to be a key piece. Taking a deep, unsteady breath, gripping my dimming flashlight like a lifeline, I took a step deeper into the West Archive, following the impossible trail of leaves into the waiting darkness. The narrow aisle stretched before me, a black marv barely illuminated by my weakening flashlight. Each step crunched on unseen debris, the sound echoing unawingly in the profound silence between whispers. The trail of oak leaves continued, one every few yards, guiding me deeper into the heart of the archive. The clicking and scraping sounds ahead grew slightly more distinct, intermittent but deliberate. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like unseen currents. They seemed to possess a mocking quality now, fragments coalescing into near words before dissolving again. Davies, foolish, the lock, silver, open, see. Rule 3 became a mantra, a shield against the rising tide of fear. Ignore them. Ignore them. The shelves here were even more chaotic. Books lay piled haphazardly, some spine up, others splayed open, their pages brittle and yellowed. Strange artifacts became more common, intricate clockwork devices frozen mid-motion, dusty astrolabes, anatomical models of creatures unknown to science, all interspersed with the endless volumes. The air grew thick with the cloying scent of dried flowers and decay, overlaying the ever-present cold. My flashlight beam landed on another leaf, resting near the base of a shelf crammed with oversized, iron-bound ledgers. As I stepped closer, the clicking sound returned, louder this time, directly ahead. Click, scrape, click. It seemed to be coming from the end of this aisle, where the shelves formed a small, dead-end alcove. I slowed my pace, heart pounding. The flashlight flickered again, dimming noticeably before returning to its weakened state. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. Reaching the end of the aisle, I cautiously peered around the corner shelf into the alcove. It was small, barely 6 feet deep. The back wall wasn't shelved, but paneled in the same dark wood. In the center of the paneling, at chest height, was a small, ornate metal door, no bigger than a bread box, inlaid with silver symbols that seemed to writhe in the unsteady beam of my flashlight. A complex keyhole sat beneath a small, lever-like handle. The handle was currently pointing downwards. As I watched, frozen, the handle slowly, mechanically lifted upwards. Click. It paused, then began to lower again. Scrape, click. It was the source of the sounds. A mechanism operating on its own in the heart of the locked archive. But that wasn't all. Resting on the floor directly in front of the small metal door was another object, placed as if an offering. A book, bound in black leather, spine blank. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't the book from outside. It was another one. Or perhaps, had the one from outside been moved here? Had I been lured into the archive only to find the problem seemingly resolved, placed back within these walls, albeit not on its shelf? No, that felt too simple, too neat. The black book outside hadn't moved when I last checked. This had to be a second one. Were there more? Were they multiplying? The whispers surged, swirling around the alcove. Louder, more insistent. Open. The door. Alex. See. Inside. Blackwood's heart. Key. Open. My eyes darted between the autonomously moving handle on the small silver inlaid door and the forbidden book at its base. The flashlight flickered violently now, threatening to plunge me into total darkness. The oak leaf trail ended here, at this bizarre tableau. What was behind that small door? What connection did it have to the black books? The handle clicked upwards again, then began its slow descent. It felt like a countdown, or an invitation. Rule 4 screamed, "Do not touch these books." But the book wasn't on a shelf. It was placed before this strange mechanism, and the whispers were urging me towards the door, towards opening it. Was the book the key? Or bait? The flashlight sputtered, dimmed to a faint orange glow, then died, plunging the alcove and the surrounding archive into absolute, suffocating blackness. The whispers rushed in, filling the void, seeming to come from inches away, cold breath against my skin. The rhythmic click, scrape, click of the handle continued relentlessly in the dark, a mechanical heartbeat in the center of the ancient, watchful library. I was trapped, blind, with a forbidden book at my feet and an unknown mechanism operating just beyond my reach. Panic surged, cold and electric, as the darkness swallowed the last vestiges of light. Blindness was absolute. The rhythmic click, scrape, click of the hidden mechanism seemed amplified, drilling directly into my skull. The whispers were no longer peripheral. They were intimate, invasive, cold streams of sound pouring into my ears, brushing against my face like unseen cobwebs. Open. Door. Alex. Now. Blackwood. Heart. Key. Touch. Book. See. I stumbled back instinctively, my hands flailing the void, hitting the hard edge of a bookshelf. Book stumbled, hitting the floor with muffled thuds that were quickly drowned out by the swirling whispers. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold, stale air burning my lungs. Rule 3, ignore them, felt like an impossible command in the sensory deprivation nightmare. Trapped. Blind. Something mechanical operating nearby. A forbidden book at my feet. The whispers demanding action. My mind raced, trying to find a logical foothold. The key. The archive key was still in my pocket. But for which lock? The main door I'd entered through? Or this small, silver-inlaid door clicking away in the darkness before me? The whispers seemed to answer. Key, silver. Door, open. Heart. My fingers closed around the key in my pocket. It felt colder than before, almost icy. Was this the specific retrieval required? Not just securing the book, but using the key on this door? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Opening an unknown door, operated by an autonomous mechanism, deep within a forbidden archive filled with whispering entities, seemed like the definition of insanity. But what was the alternative? Wait here in the dark until whatever presence inhabited this place decided to reveal itself more directly? Wait until whatever was making noises in my apartment decided to come down? The situation felt like a rapidly closing vise. The scraping sound intensified for a moment, followed by a louder clunk. The rhythmic clicking stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart and the lingering echo of the whispers in my mind. What had happened? Had the mechanism finished its cycle, jammed, or prepared something? Hesitantly, reaching out with trembling hands, I shuffled forward, back towards where I estimated the alcove and the small door were. My fingers brushed against dusty wood paneling. Moving sideways, my hand found the edge of the small metal door. It was cold, smooth, the inlaid silver symbols feeling slightly raised beneath my fingertips. My hand fumbled lower, finding the lever-like handle. It was now still, pointing directly downwards in what I assumed was the closed or finished position. And below it, my foot nudged the smooth leather binding of the black book. It hadn't moved. The whispers returned, softer now, more insidious. A single, sibilant voice cutting through the remembered chorus. Take the book. Alex, it is the key. Open. The heart. The book is the key? Not the silver key in my pocket? My mind recoiled. Rule 4. Do not touch these books. It was the most explicit prohibition regarding these objects. Touching it felt like crossing a definitive line, an act of deliberate defiance against the library's stated rules. But the situation was desperate. The flashlight was dead. The rhythmic clicking had stopped, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The whispers were directly instructing me. Was this the true test? Was adherence to the written rules a trap in itself? And the real path forward lay in listening to the library's spectral voice, in breaking the explicit rule to follow the implicit command? My fingers hovered over the book's spine, inches away in the darkness. The leather seemed to radiate a faint warmth, a stark contrast to the icy metal of the small door above it. Take it, Alex. Open. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet, the feeling of being guided, manipulated towards this exact point, was undeniable. The leaves, the key, the black book outside, the clock, the noises, all leading here, to this moment, in the dark, before this door, with this book. Gritting my teeth, steeling myself against the anticipated consequences, I broke the rule. My fingers closed around the smooth, unnervingly warm leather of the untitled black book. The moment my fingers made contact with the black leather, a jolt, like static electricity but colder and deeper, shot up my arm. The book felt unnaturally smooth, almost alive beneath my touch, radiating a faint, pulsing warmth that pushed back against the archive's oppressive chill. It was heavier than it looked, possessing a strange density. The whispers abruptly ceased. The sudden, absolute silence was somehow more terrifying than the sibilant chorus. It felt like the holding of a breath, an entire unseen world pausing in anticipation. The click, scrape, click of the handle remained silent. It is the key. Open. The heart. The final instruction echoed in the void left by the whispers. Holding the book felt like holding a dormant power, something ancient and unknowable. My other hand still clutched the icy silver key to the archive's main door, now seemingly useless for this task. With my flashlight dead, I was operating purely on touch and the memory of the alcove's layout. Trembling, book held tight in my right hand. I reached out with my left, finding the cold metal surface of the small, silver-inlaid door again. My fingers traced its edges, the intricate, slightly raised symbols, settling on the keyhole beneath the still, downward-pointing handle. Was I supposed to insert the book? That made no sense. Open. The heart. Hesitantly, I brought the book closer to the small door. As the warm leather neared the cold metal, a low hum began to resonate, vibrating through the wood paneling, through the floor, up my legs. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, guttural, like a sleeping beast stirring. My fingers, still holding the book, brushed against the silver keyhole. The hum intensified instantly. The book pulsed warmth against my palm. The silver symbols inlaid on the door began to glow faintly, emitting a pale, ethereal light, just bright enough to illuminate the immediate space, the alcove walls. My own wide eyes reflected dimly in the metal, the intricate keyhole. It wasn't a keyhole meant for a metal key. It was a shallow, rectangular depression, roughly the size and shape of the black book's cover. My breath hitched. The library, the whispers, they hadn't meant the silver key. They meant the book was the key. Literally, the glowing symbols on the door seemed to writhe, shifting like liquid mercury. The humming vibrated in my teeth. With a sense of dreadful inevitability, guided by an unseen force, or perhaps just the terrifying logic of the situation, I pressed the front cover of the black book flat against the rectangular depression on the small metal door. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a soft shalichka, the book seemed to lock into place, held fast against the door as if by magnetism. The silver symbols flared brightly, momentarily blinding me even in the low light. The humming intensified into a low groan, and the small metal door swung silently inward, opening into an even deeper, more profound darkness beyond. The book remained attached to the now open door. A faint, cool draft carrying a completely different scent, damp earth, decaying leaves, something vaguely sweet and sickly, like overripe fruit, drifted out from the opening. The pale light from the symbols cast flickering illumination just a few inches into the space beyond, revealing nothing but textured darkness. I instinctively recoiled, pulling my hand away from the open door and the attached book. What had I done? What was this heart the whisper spoke of? Before I could process further, a sound from behind me shattered the stillness. The heavy thud and scrape of the main west archive door, the one I'd entered through, being pushed open from the other side. Light, weak but distinct, spilled into the archive from the main hall, silhouetting a tall, impossibly thin figure standing in the doorway. The shadow I had glimpsed the night before. It wasn't settling, it wasn't the wind, and it had followed me. My blood turned to ice water. Trapped. The weak light from the main hall silhouetted the figure in the archive doorway, tall, disturbingly thin, limbs seemingly too long for its torso, head indistinct in the shadows. It didn't move, simply stood there, an obstruction, a silent sentinel blocking my only known escape route. The oppressive darkness of the archive felt suddenly less like a void and more like a cage with this entity guarding the bars. Behind me, the small, silver inlaid door remained open, the black book still affixed to it like a morbid key. The faint, sickly sweet scent of damp earth and decay wafted out from the utter blackness within, a stark contrast to the archive's dusty, funereal air. My mind screamed at me, the heart, Blackwood's heart. But the words offered no understanding, only a deeper dread. The figure in the doorway shifted. It wasn't a normal movement, not a step or a lean, but a subtle, unsettling elongation, like taffy being pulled. It seemed to flow rather than walk as it began to move into the archive, gliding silently over the debris-strewn floor. The weak light from the hall caught glimpses, pale, featureless skin stretched taut over sharp angles, no discernible face, just a suggestion of indentations where eyes might be. Its silence was profound, more unnerving than the whispers had been. Every instinct screamed run. But where? Forward, into the unknown blackness emanating from the small open door? Or try to push past this thing, blocking the way back? As the figure drifted closer, its unnaturally long fingers twitching slightly at its sides, the cold in the archive deepened. Frost began to bloom on the nearby shelves, spreading in intricate, icy patterns across the leather spines of ancient books. The air grew painfully cold, stinging my lungs with each ragged breath. My gaze flickered back to the small open door. The cool draft had ceased. The darkness within seemed absolute, yet somehow expectant. Open, the heart. The whisper echoed, not from the air now, but from within my own mind. Was this the heart of the library? The source of its power, its consciousness? The figure was halfway down the aisle now, moving with that silent, gliding gait. It showed no overt aggression, yet its very presence radiated menace. Its form seemed to absorb the already faint light, making the surrounding darkness press in even closer. My hand tightened on the silver key in my pocket. The key to this door, the main archive door. Could I get past the figure? Could I slam the door shut, lock it from the outside, trap it in here? But what about the open heart door behind me? What about the black book still attached to it? Leaving that accessible felt catastrophically wrong. The figure stopped, perhaps 10 feet away. It tilted its head, a slow, unnatural motion. Though it had no discernible eyes, I felt its gaze fix upon me, cold and calculating. Then, slowly, one impossibly long arm began to rise, pale fingers extending not towards me, but towards the alcove, towards the small, open door behind me. It wasn't interested in me. Not directly. It was interested in what I had opened. In that moment, a desperate, reckless clarity hit me. The black book was the key. Maybe it was also the lock. The whispers had urged me to take it, to open the heart. They hadn't said anything about leaving it open. Ignoring the figure, ignoring the paralyzing cold, I lunged back towards the alcove. My hands found the black book still clinging to the small, inward swinging door. I grabbed its spine, pulling. It resisted for a moment, held fast, then detached with another soft shalichka. Book in hand, I immediately slammed the small metal door shut. It closed with a heavy, resonant thunk. The silver symbols flared one last time, then faded. The deep hum ceased instantly. The unnatural cold began to recede slightly, the frost on the shelves losing its sharp edge. Silence. I turned, book clutched to my chest like a shield, to face the figure. It stood motionless where I'd left it, its long arm still partially raised, fingers now curled slightly. It seemed confused, thwarted. Did you just lock it out? Or lock us in? The figure slowly lowered its arm. It tilted its head again, the featureless expanse where its face should be aimed directly at me, or perhaps at the book I held. The air crackled with tension. Then, from the main archive door behind the figure, came a new sound. A metallic rattle. The sound of the silver key. My silver key, turning the lock from the outside. Followed by the heavy, definitive clunk of a bolt sliding home. Someone had locked the main archive door. Locking me in, locking us in, together.